Hi, everyone. We are jumping right in today. This submission is a second-person script guiding a cosmic wanderer through a landing and an accelerated sunrise on the planet Mercury.
Right, and the descriptive imagery regarding Mercury's extreme environment it's highly immersive.
It really is. But there are definitely structural and thematic areas to elevate the piece, so we are going to dive straight into the analysis. And the first thing is, the narrative relies too heavily on restating the same environmental constraints rather than escalating their physical consequences.
Yeah, is there a risk that focusing solely on reiterating the lack of atmosphere might overlook the opportunity to build a sense of escalating physical tension as the ship gets closer to the ground?
Exactly.
Because, a planetary descent is inherently a ticking clock. Gravity is pulling the wanderer down, but the pacing of the script, it kind of actively resists that downward pull.
So a key theme running through this material seems to be the airless, brutal nature of the planet. We get these stark, honestly terrifying descriptions of the whisper-thin exosphere. And the pitch-black skies during the daylight hours, plus those wild temperature swings from negative 170 degrees Celsius up to over 400 degrees.
Which is just wild to think about.
Oh, totally. But as the descent sequence plays out on the page, the forward momentum completely stalls. I mean, to put it in cinematic terms, it operates like a film that keeps cutting back to the exact same establishing shot of a vast desert.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right? Like, it might be a gorgeously composed shot of the sand, but if you keep cutting away from a high-speed car chase to show me the wide angle of the empty dunes, you halt the velocity of the action entirely.
Yeah. The weakness here is that the script continuously loops back to remind the listener about the lack of atmosphere and those brutal temperatures. It does that rather than letting the environment actually inflict its reality on the wanderer.
Right.
Like, looking at the text, the author uses variations like almost no atmosphere, and then just a few paragraphs later, practically no atmosphere.
Yeah, and then again on the final approach, no real atmosphere.
Exactly. This circular repetition really dilutes the impact of the landing sequence. The audience is being told the foundational premise repeatedly, instead of experiencing what that premise actually does to the ship's hull or the spacesuit in real time.
Writers do this a lot, honestly, because they fear the reader will forget the stakes of the environment. But human psychology just doesn't work that way. Once you tell a reader they are stepping out into the lethal vacuum of space, they do not forget the vacuum.
No, definitely not.
It lingers in the back of their mind like a phantom limb. So the suggestion for improving this section is to streamline these planetary facts into a single, compounding sequence of sensory details.
Allow the environment to speak for itself.
Exact, through physical action and consequence, rather than, repeatedly explaining the science behind it at every single stage of the descent.
We really need to look at how to strip away the exposition and replace it with sensory deduction, uniquely tied to each altitude. Like, when the wanderer is high in orbit, that's the exact moment to establish the baseline scientific reality.
Right, get it out of the way early.
Yeah, the author can mention the sensory detail of the whisper-thin exosphere there. They can describe the faint traces of sodium and oxygen drifting passively above the rock. That sets the rules of the world right off the bat, and the listener now holds that concept of vacuum in their working memory.
And then, as the narrative pushes into the descent toward the Calorus Basin, the author should completely remove the phrase, "no atmosphere to scatter light."
Wait, completely?
Yeah. Completely. It acts as a parachute, stopping the fall to deliver a physics lesson. Instead, they should describe the stark, hard shadows slicing violently across those overlapping craters. Because there is no atmospheric scattering, there's no twilight on Mercury.
Right, there are no soft gradients at all.
None. It is blinding, absolute light, or pitch, absolute black. Describing the violence of those hard shadows forces the listener to infer the lack of atmosphere. It respects their intelligence.
That's a great point. Relying on inference fundamentally changes the pacing. So by the time the ship finally hits the surface, the narrative should focus entirely on the absolute silence and the tactile plunge into a deep freeze. Just emphasize the profound isolation. The author must trust that the listener already understands the mechanics of why the silence is absolute, based on that earlier orbital setup. The goal isn't to educate them about the vacuum anymore.
Right. The goal is to make them feel the physical cold creeping through the thermal layers of the suit.
Yes, exactly.
Well, stripping away that repetitive exposition forces us to confront the remaining dialogue. If we are trusting the listener to hold on to the facts we established in orbit, we have to look very closely at the persona delivering the remaining data points.
The voice of mission control.
Right. The voice of mission control wavers between an authoritative operational director and an omniscient tour guide, which disrupts the immersive second-person perspective.
Yeah, the script establishes an incredibly active, high-stakes operational scenario. The text literally states, your mission is to collect data. It places the listener directly inside the spacesuit.
Very hands-on.
But then the author frequently drops this operational persona to deliver textbook analogies, like describing the planetary crust as being wrinkled like a dried apple.
Yeah.
And it also pauses the immediate danger to deliver vast temporal explanations. Stopping the descent to explain that one full solar day on Mercury lasts about 176 Earth days. Mission control sounds far too relaxed and conversational for a live, extreme planetary landing.
Let's look closely at the section discussing the descent and planetary history, specifically that wrinkled crust. I can see what the author is going for here.
Sure, it's visual.
Exactly. The dried apple analogy paints a highly accessible visual picture for the listener. The pushback I have is whether strictly adhering to a highly technical, rigid mission control persona risks losing that beautiful, poetic accessibility. Like, if we strip out the folksy metaphors, do we strip out the poetry of the piece?
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the ship's onboard instrument? Telemetry and technical constraints do not have to be dry or devoid of poetry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. In fact, in a second-person narrative, tension is often generated by the sheer contrast between clinical, unfeeling data and the overwhelming, terrifying physical reality outside the window. When a narrator suddenly sounds like a high school earth science teacher, the listener is violently pulled out of the spacesuit and placed back into a classroom. It totally breaks the fourth wall.
The illusion of the second-person you is incredibly fragile, isn't it?
Extremely.
So the suggestion here is to ground the poetic and historical descriptions strictly within the reality of spacecraft telemetry, instrument readouts, and operational parameters.
Right.
By filtering the vivid imagery through active scanning data, the author maintains the unbroken illusion of a live mission feed. It keeps the listener firmly locked inside the cockpit.
Let's translate that textbook exposition into active telemetry. Instead of mission control passively observing that the crust is wrinkled like a dried apple, the author should frame that exact same visual through a sensor readout.
How would that sound?
Mission control could report topographical scans indicate massive thrust faults below, hundreds of kilometers of cliffs formed as the planet's oversized iron core cooled and shrank.
Oh, wow.
Right? The listener still receives the vivid image of a wrinkling, shrinking crust, but it is delivered through active, real-time scanning. The data feels earned by the ship's hardware.
That framing also completely solves the issue with the educational explanation of the 176 Earth Day sunrise.
Yes, it does.
Rather than presenting it as a fun astronomical fact, the author can transform it into a direct, urgent navigational warning. Mission control might broadcast, "Warning, planetary rotational lock detected. Time acceleration mode is required to observe a full solar cycle during your surface window."
I love that. Instantly, the massive length of the Mercury day becomes a hostile puzzle the ship has to solve.
Exactly. It justifies the use of the time acceleration mode as a vital operational tool rather than just a, convenient storytelling device to speed up the plot.
And applying that same operational filter to the permanent shadows at the poles yields a much stronger result too. The script currently mentions that these shadows hold preserved water ice, just as a casual aside.
Right, just a fun fact.
Yeah, but framing this as a radar anomaly detected during the violent descent changes the entire texture of the scene. Like, radar signatures at the poles indicate stable thermal pockets, probable preserved water ice. The listener relies on their instruments to decode the hostile environment around them.
Which leads us perfectly to the next point. If we are asking the listener to trust this raw, clinical data streaming from the ship's sensors, we owe them a payoff for gathering it.
Absolutely.
Collecting data is only half the narrative equation. Interpreting what that data means for humanity is the other half. The conclusion beautifully captures the visual spectacle of the accelerated sunrise, but leaves the scientific and emotional purpose of the mission unresolved.
The ending of the script introduces this fascinating, highly evocative concept. Through the time acceleration mode, the listener watches the brutal cycle of the sun expanding, cracking the surface, and shifting the rocks grain by grain over billions of years.
It's quite the image.
It really is. It is a stunning display of deep time and extreme thermal violence.
At the weakness is that the narrative never connects this violent geological reality back to the opening objective. The opening explicitly promised the listener, your mission is to collect data.
Right.
And then the ending abruptly transitions away from the cracking rocks to a generic declaration of mission success, followed by the line, your next adventure is waiting. It just leaves the listener completely without a sense of lasting impact.
Yeah, it feels hollow.
My analogy for this structural gap is that the ending feels like taking a stunning, Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph of a major historical event, but completely forgetting to write the caption.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
The listener witnesses the incredible visual spectacle of the sun reshaping the stone, but they have absolutely no context for what to do with the information. They don't know why they took the picture in the first place.
That makes sense. But could the evidence also support a different conclusion, like the data fundamentally changing our understanding of planetary survival? Because the script claims the mission was a success, leaving the definition of that success entirely ambiguous.
Right.
A story built around a scientific mission requires a thesis. It requires a definitive reason for this specific wanderer to risk a descent to this specific dead world.
So the suggestion here is to tie the physical effects of the Mercury sunrise directly back to the raw data being collected. The author needs to emphasize why this specific brutal cycle matters to humanity's broader understanding of the universe.
Exactly.
We have to elevate the data from a simple hard drive upload to a profound cosmic revelation. If the listener is going to survive the descent, the knowledge they extract from the surface has to be worth the terror of the fall.
Let's look at how to anchor that thematic payoff within the final sequence. When the script describes the rocks expanding and cracking during the accelerated sunrise, the author should add a line specifying what this data actually teaches us.
Like what, for example?
Well, for example, observing this thermal fracturing in real time allows humanity to understand how Mercury's whisper-thin exosphere is constantly replenished by pulverized dust. The rocks cracking isn't just a cool visual effect. It is the physical engine generating the planet's atmosphere.
I see.
The violence serves a purpose. It solves a scientific mystery that justifies the whole journey.
Oh, that's powerful.
Right? This gives immense narrative weight to the earlier telemetry readings about the iron core. It proves that the planet isn't just sitting there passively taking a beating. It actually has a massive internal defense mechanism. It frames the planet as a survivor.
And redefining the planet as a survivor completely alters the emotional resonance of the departure. Instead of ending with, your next adventure is already waiting, which, frames the experience as a consequence-free theme park ride.
Right, a bit too casual. Yeah, the departure should be framed as a critical extraction. The wanderer is carrying vital, hard-won knowledge back to the star. The dialogue could shift to something like, your mission is a success. We now hold the blueprint for how a world survives the fire of its star. Prepare for departure.
That turns a passive sightseeing tour into a crucial mission of discovery. It gives the cosmic wanderer a tangible sense of purpose. So, to recap, the primary takeaways for revising this material. First, the author needs to streamline the repetitive environmental facts into a single compounding sequence of sensory details to build relentless physical momentum during the descent.
Right.
Second, unify the mission control persona by delivering all exposition and historical context through active telemetry and instrument readouts, keeping the listener locked inside the spacesuit. And third, anchor the final visually stunning sunrise sequence to a clear scientific and thematic purpose, ensuring the data collected actually means something profound to the broader universe.
The actionable summary for the writer is basically to treat the next draft like a live operation. Just merge the redundant facts about the atmosphere and the temperature. Run the mission control dialogue through a strict operational filter, questioning whether a flight director would really use a folksy metaphor during a critical landing sequence. And finally, look closely at the closing paragraphs and ensure the data collected on the surface directly pays off the narrative promise made in the opening line.
We invite the writer to implement these structural and thematic adjustments, revise the script, and submit the new drafts back to us for another critique. As you approach the rewrite, think about the absolute silence of the vacuum. When you step out of the airlock into that unbroken dark, you aren't just looking to survive the elements.
No, you're looking for a signal.
Exactly. Make sure that when the wanderer lands on that dead, burning world, the signal they send back changes how we understand the universe.